Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today, I'm going to be covering this book, Warden Force. Now, the subtitle is Knight Rider and Other True Game Warden Adventures. This is based off of a podcast tied to GameWarden.net. The author of this collection is Terry Hodges. It claims on the bottom of the cover it's Season 1, Episodes 1 through 13. And what's really interesting about this is that, one, I've covered game wardens before. I've covered national park rangers before. I've covered a variety of wildlife and wild areas rangers before, including fish and wildlife rangers, national park rangers, game wardens. There's a lot that goes into that industry. What makes this interesting compared to others I've done is that it's not a national park, it's fish and game, it's a game warden, and we've discussed one of those books before, and that one was Suddenly the Cider Didn't Taste So Good. That book was a collection of stories from a single game warden in Maine. This is a collection of stories from game wardens in California, which is not just a significantly bigger state, significantly bigger budget. It has a significantly bigger scope of competency, I guess is the way to put it. I don't want to say, and don't let it be interpreted, that I'm saying that one state is more competent than the other. But one of these states, the game warden job encompasses a much bigger range of responsibilities than the game warden in Maine. And that's because California has a much bigger population. It has more varied terrain. It deals with a lot more crime because it comes with a larger population. It comes with a lot of people that are different moods, I guess is the best way to put it. In the case of Suddenly the Cider Didn't Taste So Good, that was a smaller state. A lot of the run-ins that author had with criminals were people that he knew through the community or people whose businesses he had interacted with. In the case of the author of Suddenly the Cider Didn't Taste So Good, the criminals that he deals with are small town criminals. They might be introducing people from Boston or New York City to that area and hosting them. But for the most part, it's a smaller town vibe. A lot of the people he interacts with, he knows through the community. And so that carries with it a more down-to-earth problem. And in the case of the title, the story the title of that book comes from is a case where he's interacting with one of those criminals and he knows that the guy had been baiting deer in a particular way. He peed on the apples that were used to bait the deer, and that criminal turns it back on the warden and says, I know that you knew about that pile of apples, so I made this cider from those apples that you peed on. Thus, resulting in the game warden reflecting that suddenly the cider didn't taste so good because he was being pranked by people he knew, but by people he was trying to be on friendly enough terms with that they decided, we're going to ruin that right now. The game wardens in this might have some of those relationships, but because California is so much bigger than Maine in population, in area, in scope of practice, scope of practice is the word I was looking for, not competency. Because the scope of practice is so much bigger in California, the stories aren't as down to earth and almost good old boy in theming. It's very impersonal. This book is copyright 2016. The cover design by Tatiana Villa. interior layout by Veronica Yeager. And there's a disclaimer here. The information in this book is distributed on an as-is basis without warranty. Although every precaution has been taken in the preparation of this work, neither the author nor the publisher shall have any liability to any person or entity with respect to any loss or damage caused or alleged to be caused, directly or indirectly, by the information contained in this book. That disclaimer matters because this is law enforcement, and people's identities, their names have been changed to suit the need for the anonymity with this kind of storytelling. But some of these cases may be obvious enough that someone can do the research and maybe even figure out who the arresting officials were and so on and so forth. So the disclaimer is to protect from that, but also it shows an understanding of the risk inherent in this field, this line of work, which makes sense because, again, all of these stories are submitted by game wardens. One of the things I will say about this book that kind of annoyed me when I first read it, is that it's very clear that the editing wasn't really paid attention to, because on page 12 there's a story that ends with, "Did you cry when Old Yeller died? No, you didn't cry when Old Yeller died? You must really be tough. Even I cried when Old Yeller died." But instead of using L's, they use 01. So instead of saying ol, it says 01 apostrophe. Now, that may be forgivable if it happens once, but this happens repeatedly on the same page. So if I were to read it as it's written, it would say, "Did you cry when 01 Yeller died? No. You didn't cry when 01 Yeller died? You must really be tough. Even I cried when 01 Yeller died." In this case, O meaning 0. But the point is that the editing at multiple points of this book have the same issue. But this book is fascinating. It has a collection of stories from game wardens, from a narrative from the perspective of a fish to a narrative about a young man who is trying as hard as he can to be a game warden and puts in as much time as he can, works below the means that he could be earning if he were in another field. He is doing all this because he is a third generation American. His grandfather, or it might have been like his great grandfather, came to the United States of America and landed on a particular beach. And that's how they started their time in the US. And through the years, this man has wanted to be a game warden, and he and his family know the beach his ancestor landed on, and when he was a kid, he and his brother visited that beach, and this ranger wants to be a game warden. He wants to be a game warden for this particular district, and he works his butt off for it. And it is an inspiring story of American integration and the melting pot of America, that this man busted his chops and eventually did become that game warden. So there's stories about, a fish that manages to get away thanks to the help of a game warden, to this amazing, truly American story about a game warden. There's cases of neo-Nazis in the hills. There's all sorts of stories in this book that really highlight the kind of adventures and cases game wardens have to deal with. One of my favorites involves a rookie that knows that these people are scuba diving off the coast to steal shellfish out of season, and he ends up catching them, but they drop their shellfish, which is the only concrete evidence that they're committing this crime. But the shellfish don't disperse, and so he gets the bag later on. But he also has a very risky incident of catching these criminals. So it's a really fantastic story. Another aspect of this is that a lot of these stories are from the 80s, the 90s. Very few of them are recent stories, but they are stories from the old timers, the old game wardens, who are sharing it and hoping that people hear this and get a sense of what being a game warden means, what being a game warden does. And it's just a really fascinating book. I loved it. It's only about 150 pages long, but it's a really good book filled with a collection of all sorts of stories. So I really liked Warden Force, Knight Rider, and other true Game Warden adventures. I think if any of these books about park rangers, about game wardens, about fish and wildlife crew, if any of those books have interested you, this is going to be a fantastic read for you. Anyway, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.